This week on The Futurists, the future is a state of mind.
Arguing whether or not this is going to happen, whether or not climate change is going to impact, whether or not robots are going to take human jobs, that's largely, I've come to the conclusion, is largely a waste of time.
Hey there, welcome back to The Futurists. I'm Rob Tercek with my friend Brett King. Hey, Brett.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm pretty good, thanks. So things are exciting here. I'm getting ready for a trip to Dubai in a couple days, so that'll be fun.
Oh, cool.
It's 106 degrees there, so it'll be real warm.
Oh, it's not the hottest. I was there one time when it was 53 degrees Celsius, which is, I guess, 125, something like that, maybe a bit more.
That's crazy. How can people live in that? But this seems to be the world we're launching. We're moving headlong into it here in the U.S.
Yeah, 127. 127 it was. And it was, I remember it was hot enough that we had a booster seat for Matthew. This is how long ago it was. Matthew's 21 now. We had a booster seat in the back of the car, which was a Volvo XC90, and the booster seat had melted.
Whoa.
The plastic in the middle had sagged. That's how hot it was in the car.
Wow.
Pretty crazy.
Hopefully he wasn't in the car when that happened.
No, he wasn't in the car. No.
We're having a big heat wave here in the U.S. on the East Coast, sort of unseasonable weather. And here in California, of course, fire season, the bane of our existence. Fire season is back. Things are burning.
The Surgeon General said he wants to do releases about the heat risk this summer, right?
Yeah, people are already saying that it's like a national emergency. But this seems like the new normal. Here in California, we have fire season.
This is climate change. Yeah.
Yeah, welcome to it. Like, this will be the way it is. It'll be hotter and hotter each year.
I don't know if you listened to that interview that I did with Paul Ark on this. And Paul Ark said something sort of scary, but it'll never be as cold as it is right now over the next couple of decades. Pretty crazy.
Yeah, don't invest in lots of warm sweaters. This will be t-shirt season coming up. In the Surgeon General's in the news here in the U.S. And for other reasons as well. The Surgeon General in the U.S. now is saying that there has to be a warning on social media for children because it can cause mental or emotional harm. Imagine that, a Surgeon General's warning, like a pack of cigarettes on Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the evidence, especially for young people, is fairly clear. It does create a lot of angst and is used as a platform for bullying. I mean, we see that every day, right?
Yeah, but that's people on the other side of it, right? So it's not really the technology that's to blame, although it's a convenient whipping boy.
Well, I guess it does mean that if you're a parent in this situation, you should be monitoring your kids' social media accounts at a minimum. I think that's.
Do you know any parent that doesn't?
No, I guess so.
I mean, every parent I know is pretty vigilant about this stuff. It's not like they get in the way or they tell their kids what to do, but they certainly pay attention.
Yeah.
You don't want to zone out too much. It was funny. A friend of mine was driving up to go skiing and was with his daughter. And so she was picking music for the car. And he said literally every 15 seconds, she was getting a notification. Sometimes she would get multiple notifications. So like the car is driving and they're listening to the music, but every 15 seconds you hear that ping sound from the notifications. Yeah. And he said, it is kind of like a form of behavioral conditioning where it's just
Pavlov's
training
dog.
you. It's Pavlov's dog, exactly.
Ding,
and you look at your phone, and ding, you look at your phone. So it's
got to get that endorphin hit. Yeah.
And of course, we always look, right? Because you don't want to miss the important message. One of them might matter. So I thought we would talk a little bit about the state of the future. My thinking is the future is a state of mind. And I say that, Brett, because I encounter so many people who have this conditioning, their own kind of conditioning, which is that they can't do that. That's for somebody else. You see this with artificial intelligence here in Los Angeles, but there's a mindset that says, oh, that's not for us. That's being imposed on us by technology companies, and we're going to resist it. And as a result, there's a lack of curiosity or openness or even a willingness to check it out. There's just a kind of like
the same was true of Facebook, right? So many people said, "Oh, I don't need Facebook in my life." When that's for college students,
There were people who said that about mobile phones. I remember clearly. Why do I need a mobile phone? Right? I know that's a long time ago, but that was another thing.
No, I remember I had this old Motorola Transportable, and it was like literally carrying around a brick of a battery with a car phone on top of it. That's what it looked like.
Yeah.
And all my friends used to give me a hard time. You know,
remember Michael Douglas in the first Wall Street movie with the phone that was the size of a shoebox. Right?
Yeah.
But I mean, as ridiculous as that is, there's sort of like you and I are kind of people who lean in, right? So we say, okay, here's a new thing. Let's get curious
Let's
about
try
it
it
and
out.
figure out what it
I want to figure it out. Yeah.
I was just talking to Kevin about Udeo. Udeo is a generative AI for music, and it's creating quite a sensation.
I've seen this.
Friends who are artists.
Yeah, I watched this YouTube musician guy, and he was talking about it the other day. You'll know who I'm talking about when I come up with his name, but I've just had a brain fart at the moment. So
I think I saw that clip. And he's talking about how he wrote a song with Udeo, and after listening to it, he tried to play it himself, and he couldn't play it better than the AI, and he was stunned. Right, that moment in that video is really powerful. Now, for the people are listening, Udeo, it's UDIO, it's a generative AI app, and anyone can use it with text. You just type in a description, and it'll generate songs. What's remarkable about it is it'll generate the lyrics and the voice, as well as the background music and the orchestration. And you can hear the breaths of the singer, even though it's virtual, and you can hear, the violins and so on. Now, maybe professional musicians can hear the distinctions. I can't. I listen to it and I'm like, wow, this is pretty good. I would not be able to distinguish this from music that was recorded by a human. And I think that's the point, Brett. Pretty soon we're going to be surrounded by music, and you'll have no idea, if you're the average person, you'll have no idea if there was a human artist involved in that or not. This is a very strange concept, right? Like music on demand. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Music generated by a machine. I don't know. Okay, maybe. But then music without humanity. Oh, wait, there's something definitely uncomfortable about that, right?
But it's not without humanity. It's still influenced by humanity, surely, right?
Yeah, sure, that's true.
I mean, if you're going to create a Beatles sound-alike track, it's still influenced by the Beatles. So I don't think you can have really original music from an AI, unless you just talk about just frequency and mathematics, which you could produce music from that approach. But yeah, I think that's why we have all of this debate over copyright at the moment, is at what point does it diverge from the data that's been used to train it? Significantly enough that it is no longer recognizable as that artist's work. That's sort of a really tricky point.
Yeah, but it's not like it's playing back, remixes of the Beatles or something. This is completely different from any music you've heard.
Yeah.
But what's funny about it is the genres sound so familiar. So for instance, the pop music sounds like all the pop music that you hear on Spotify. And actually, that's not the fault of the AI. That's the fault of the record labels. So we have been using, auto tuners and synthetic instruments and drum machines and so on for so long that's kind of the texture of pop music today. And so when an AI generates that stuff, it doesn't sound so synthetic. It actually sounds kind of typical or normal.
Yeah.
That's conditioning that's from the record labels. That's not the fault of AI. And if the AI spins that stuff back at us, well, that's because there's a lot of that content out there right now.
Absolutely.
But I find this everywhere where people, putting on the future is like putting on a sweater that's too tight. It's a little bit uncomfortable, and you have to kind of get used to it. And not everybody is willing to make that change.
One of the things that I surprisingly got a bit of traction on social this week was a clip I played from Rick Beato is the guy that was talking about it. I don't know if you've watched Rick, but I put a clip out about technology adoption diffusion, and that is this factor of the fact that as more and more technology comes into the world, then the adoption rate speeds up because we're more accepting of technology faster, and illustrated by how long it took for Facebook to get to 100 million users versus OpenAI, et cetera, going all the way back to the microwave or television. As examples of rates of adoption change, which surprises me that that there are still people, given that there's so much evidence of broad technology adoption. Look at how integrated the iPhone is into the world today. And we know when something like this, ChatGPT, voice-based artificial intelligence, like a personal AI assistant, and people are going, oh, I don't think I'd use a personal AI assistant or something like that. But it's just like, well, that's the evidence is not that humans do that. We resist technology for a little bit, but as soon as
Yeah,
we see that network effect with other friends using it and so forth, it breaks down those barriers, and those
exactly.
barriers are being broken down quicker and quicker. So it
Yeah,
surprises me that people are still resistant to technology in that environment, because all of the evidence suggests that that resistance is futile.
yeah.
Apologies to
Get on
staff
with
that.
it. This is exactly what I say to
Yeah.
people. It's like, look, you're going to do this sooner or later. You might as well start now and
Yeah.
get familiar with it. So Apple's
But
rolling
that's
out
that
AI.
mindset, right?
Yeah, well, and change is a hassle. Like people don't want to
Yeah.
have to do another
True.
learning curve. So Apple's rolling out AI integrated into all of its devices, and in typical Apple fashion, none of the stuff that it showed is particularly groundbreaking. Like they're not trying to be first. Apple's not in the habit of is forcing people to do new things before they're ready, except maybe when it comes to the headphone adapter. That's the one thing that they foisted on people they didn't like, or getting
Mm.
rid of optical drives, I guess. But generally, Apple is a fast follower, and what they do is they launch the software when it works. And the observation there is, it's funny, people don't realize this, but your iPhone is filled with AI. Like your iPhone
Yeah.
has so much AI in it already.
Yeah.
For instance, the camera app on the iPhone is all driven by AI. The photos look great, but that's not because you're such a great photographer. It's that the AI is doing it. They have a neural system that optimizes images, that takes 8 images for every picture you take, and then it picks the best one, which might be the one that you took. It might be one of the ones that the AI took. But
Wow.
you see it and you say, "Oh, great! I'm a great photographer." So it's funny when the AI works, we call it software. When it doesn't work,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
notice it as AI. And I think you're going to start to see that now, where it gets integrated into everything, and it just works. In the famous words of Steve Jobs. But in other places, it's not. It's funny. The future unfolds in different ways, right? Like that old William Gibson quote that we always cite. The future is unevenly distributed. I'm on my way to Dubai. I'm excited to go there because this is the city of the future. At least that's what I'm told. What
Yeah.
should I expect in Dubai?
Well, I think part of the mysticism for me of Dubai is just how quickly this city has grown up, and
Mhm.
you know, I guess it's probably like your first time going to Singapore, in that you get a bit of that. Wow, this is a amazing city, crazy. The traffic's still pretty primitive in Dubai. You still have traffic issues and stuff, and it is hot. But you look around, you're like, this city has come out of nowhere in just over 20 years. From a couple of hotels on Sheikh Zayed Road to now hundreds, and being a major tourist destination and so
Yeah, like
forth. And they are
14 million
very
tourists a
future
year.
focused. Yeah, they're very future focused, as is obviously Saudi at the moment. So you will feel that this is a city trying to get into, trying to reach into the future. Even the architecture looks more futuristic and so forth. So you feel like this is an economy that's got one foot in the future. Whereas, if you go to Europe, you obviously have got a lot of history, and in the States, you don't have that same history, but you have legacy and tradition, and you have most of the infrastructure development happened post Second World War in the 60s and 70s. So you have a lot of stuff that's sort of looking old and tired from an
Yeah.
infrastructure perspective now, whereas Dubai is all new. Relatively speaking, there is a bit of the old, traditional shipping and trading infrastructure in place, but you get this feeling that they've just reset, and Dubai in particular, more so than Abu Dhabi and other places in the Emirates, has just really accelerated by just sheer will. So it shows what mindset can do on
Hmm.
an institutional level. If you have that mindset of, we are going to reach into the future to excel, to be an economy that's well placed in the future, Dubai is evidence of that.
And one of the
I-
ways they do that is they place a lot of bets, right? So they're trying a lot of
right.
things, and they know some of them won't work. Often you'll hear from people who are skeptics, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, they tried this, media neighborhood or something in Dubai that didn't work out." And what those folks are missing is they're trying a lot of things. I don't think they expect them to work out. I had a conversation with Richard Saul Worman, and one of his big themes as a designer is failure as a teacher. Like, you have to embrace failure as a teacher because it's packed full of lessons. You don't learn anything from success.
Yeah.
You learn from things that don't work out. That's how you learn how to make things better. And I think that's probably true. Like, if you think of Dubai, and actually the whole Gulf region, as a work in progress, where they're consciously trying to reinvent the region, and that's everything from the economy to society, uh, and even like energy. They're trying to reinvent all of that at one time. So of course you're not going to get it all right at the same time.
No,
What
absolutely.
else do they
So
do that's different? Like, how would you contrast, like, say, the Middle East, or just the UAE? How would you contrast that with other parts of the world that you visit?
Well, so the other thing that is obviously Dubai like Singapore is what I call a benefactory dictatorship, right? There's no democracy. Although, having said that, Emiratis get looked after very, very well, so no one's complaining, right? Obviously, there's been issues in terms of treatment of some of the labor, people, labor force and so forth. But that they have worked on that over the last couple of decades. But
Mm-hmm.
um, that sort of single party system gives them the ability to make sort of policy changes that aren't sort of really debated over, like we would have in a two-party or multi-party system. So they can be more expedient, and it's the same as we see in sort of the Chinese economy in that respect. But also, they don't have to argue in the public domain about where they're spending their money. So they don't have to justify spend on those bets. And that's, I think, a significant advantage when it comes to innovation in these technology fields, right? Because you can play with stuff that is a bit early out, but as governments, investing in those sort of edgy technologies is fairly important to see if they're going to be viable on a long-term basis. So in that respect, as an economy that sort of looks at investment in these sorts of things, they're probably a lot more aggressive than say the US or the West in general would be.
They can be, but the big argument against that is, the reason for multi-party democracies is that there's accountability. So if the party in charge is making great decisions, well, sure, they get to stay in power for longer. If the party in charge starts to make bad or self-serving decisions, then you've got another group there that's advocating against and holds them accountable. Yes, it's messy, it's embarrassing and awkward to watch our Congress dysfunction in full public view. And around the world, people look at that and they say, "Gosh, maybe that's not the best model. It's very inefficient, right? It's slow. It's very difficult to achieve consensus. That's a cumbersome and messy process. Democracy is." My thinking is that famously
this
places
is
that are
really
corrupt, right? Like
this is a
these single party
debate.
countries.
Yeah, this is a debate we can definitely have. But I think if you look at, there are downsides to it. And there are some specific downsides in in the UAE and in the Gulf. And over time, I think they fix these problems. But for example, in 2008, when the financial crisis hit, people were leaving Dubai in droves and leaving their cars at airports and things like that because there was no mechanism under this situation where there was a financial collapse where you could continue your residency in Dubai because, if you lost your sponsor as an employer, then you had to leave within 6 weeks and then you couldn't keep paying your mortgage, right? So it was a situation that was basically not catered for under the law. So now you don't have those restrictions. You can get the gold visa and so forth. So Dubai has learned their lessons when, from a functional perspective, they got things wrong because there wasn't that accountability. But when it affects their attractiveness as a capital, and they're going to restrict investment and immigration into the country because of the perception of those things, they're going to fix it really rapidly because that's sort of a key to their ongoing livelihood and the continued growth, because Dubai is making a transition from a hydrocarbon petrochemical economy to a futuristic, sustainable, AI-based smart economy, right? That's sort of their goal.
That's the goal.
And
Yeah, we shall see.
yeah, And
I
so
hope
when the
hopefully
oil
they'll.
money runs out, that they've got a plan. And so I do know that I can see the downsides, but at the same time, I can see how they've really tried to create an environment that does encourage innovation, does encourage different thinking, and as a result, Dubai has made such rapid progress, and the Emirates generally, and that's sort of, I think, what showed Saudi what was possible,
Hmm.
and why you've
You're right.
seen a lot of reform in Saudi.
You're right. They're influential in their region. That's for sure true. The granddaddy of all these places is Singapore, right? So for 30 years under single party leadership, one could say a benevolent dictatorship. Um, Singapore was able to raise itself from a backwater, and really seriously, in the 1950s, Singapore was where old sailors would go to get tattoos and get hooked on heroin. It was not a city of the future by any stretch. But under Lee Kuan Yew, there was a vision to reinvent the city. Because it's a city state, it doesn't have enough resources. So they realized they were going to have to succeed by services and light manufacturing. And as you're describing about the Middle East, and particularly the UAE, Singapore embarked on this mission with a singular focus. They were going to reinvent the entire economy. One of the interesting things about Singapore when I worked there is that there's a focus on multiculturalism that's baked in at the earliest stages in school.
Mm.
There are four different ethnic groups in Singapore, and
They've got to work together. Yeah.
they said, look, if we're going to succeed, we have to learn how to serve different ethnic groups in our neighboring countries and so on. And so they teach it in school. They teach an awareness and an acceptance of other cultures. So that could be, Islamic people and the native Malay population, but also Chinese culture and so forth. And so there's a kind of conscious and government fostered attempt to engineer society to be multicultural and accepting. And I think that's one of the reasons why Singapore has been so successful. Is certainly when China was making its capitalist turn in the late 90s under Chairman Deng, they focused on that. They looked at Singapore as a leader. At one point, even recruited Singapore government to be an advisor to reinventing Shanghai. There was a concept at that point
Mm.
of like creating a model, like a big model of Singapore and Shanghai. It's funny we forget about that history, but these countries have come an awfully long way. It wasn't so long ago, kind of just before our lifetimes, where these were not the world leading cities. They were not the futuristic cities. In other words, it's possible to do it. It's possible
But
to make that
I
change.
think that's the point, right? The point is, if you look at, there's not a city in the West that couldn't have done what Dubai and Singapore has done, but they haven't. And to China's credit, China is doing it. Look at Shenzhen, like just incredible. I'd say one of the smartest cities in the world today. Obviously, Shanghai and Beijing. Also, if you go there, all
Mhm.
of the roads and bridges and telecoms infrastructure are brand new. They've replaced, and these are cities that go back, pre.
Thousands of years. Yeah.
Yeah, thousands of years, right? And so, to get that feeling, I mean, we see, I lived in New York for a number of years, and the bridges were falling apart, bits of concrete falling off them, and bridges rusting, and concerns about, the
That hasn't
viability
changed.
of
I was
that and
just there
stuff.
last
Yeah,
week. It
right.
it hasn't changed. It's still like
So
it's
China has already tackled that, and so, when you look at sort of future proofing your economy, I think it starts with, do you want your cities to have the latest infrastructure to stay competitive? And I don't know why that's even really an argument. If you want to be a city that dominates economically, you're going to have highly autonomous systems. You're going to have more robotics and AI and things like that. But you are going to be trying to get investment into those next generation technologies. You're going to be trying new things. You're going to be investing in skills and people that will take you to that next level. I mean, that would seem like a fairly basic approach to, your economy staying competitive in the future. But we don't generally see this in the West. There's an argument over, sort of these new emerging systems and whether we should change from the traditional systems we've had. And that's not a debate you're going to have in Dubai or Singapore.
Yeah, the feeling in particular in the West and the United States, especially, I think, is that government stays out of these decisions and lets the free market make the decision. But then that's just a slippery slope towards this belief that the government should not do anything, and somehow the government should stay the same. Our patent office in the U.S. is like the high tech office of the U.S. government, and they're operating on machines like Windows machines that are 10 years out of date. So like their infrastructure is from the past. Because that's the mentality. Like they're penalized by Congress. They're not allowed to update their systems. Hey, Brett, let's take a break because what I want to do is get a cup of coffee, and then we'll come back and talk about where the U.S. has focused its energy. I'll be right back. I'm just going to get a coffee. So hang tight, folks. You're listening to The Futurist with Brett King and Rob Tercek. See you in a sec.
Provoke Media is proud to sponsor, produce, and support The Futurist podcast. Provoke.fm is a global podcast network and content creation company with the world's leading fintech podcast and radio show, Breaking Banks. And of course, its spin-off podcast, Breaking Banks Europe, Breaking Banks Asia Pacific. But we also produce the official Finovate podcast, Tech on Reg, and Emerge Everywhere, the podcast of the Financial Health Network. For information about all our podcasts, go to provoke.fm or check out Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show. Welcome back to The Futurist. You're listening to Brett King and Rob Tercek, and we're talking about the sort of the state of the future from a mindset perspective, and which economies and which type of systems really are the most future resilient, and how can you apply this in your own thinking today? But Rob, just before we had the break, we're just starting to really get into this sort of supply chain infrastructure, and particularly from an automation perspective. So, when we talk about supply chain automation, maybe let's just give it a definition for people who aren't familiar with this term.
Sure. Okay. So the supply chain, first of all, is a very abstract concept for most people. But what the supply chain is that invisible network of more than 1 million companies in 206 countries around the world. And somehow magically they know what customers in Peoria, Illinois are interested in buying, and they're able to build those products. And they're able to do that because we have data from the cash register that's provided to those manufacturers. So they get real-time data. Most people don't see that. We don't even notice it as consumers. We just expect that there's going to be eggs and milk and bread in the grocery store every time we go there. And when there isn't, that's the only time we notice the supply chain is when for instance, during the pandemic, suddenly everybody in the country got interested in supply chain. Brett, I've been a supply chain geek for years. It's a fascinating subject to me because the supply chain is the most complicated things humans have ever built. Most people participate in the supply chain. Of the 8 billion people on the planet, we all consume stuff that is produced in other places that's provided to the supply chain. But actually, half the jobs in the United States, more than 40% of the jobs in the United States, directly are impacted by supply chain. Either you're in the retail side of it, manufacturing side of it, or the distribution side of it. Essentially, that's the way goods are created and distributed. And the magic of this is it happens without central coordination. It happens without a government. There's nobody telling people what to make or how to do it. There's no central planning. This is a completely spontaneous and self-organizing system organized around data standards. When we talk about big data today, that's a term we've been throwing around for decades, but that term actually originates with the grocery store supply chain. The barcode scanner that was introduced in Dayton, Ohio in 1973 was the first time they were able to collect real-time data from the point of sale and then share that data back to manufacturers. And it took about a decade to get that system to work properly, but by the 1980s, that was the norm. And what happened in the 1980s is that the companies, the retailers that embraced scanners at checkout were able to manage much bigger inventories because they knew what they was selling. They could instantly see what was coming off the shelves and what they had to order and so forth. And so that's when you saw the dawn of the superstore, the big supercenter, like the Walmart supercenter or the big Target stores.
Yeah.
Big transformation. And it took a few more years for that to spread around the world. But I think that's pretty common now in most cities that have at least places that are set up with automobiles where people can fill them with goods. All the stuff on those shelves comes from the supply chain. All the stuff on those shelves is automatically ordered. The fulfillment is already ordered. Like the manufacturers know what's selling on the date that it sells. It's kind of an extraordinary thing to think that a company, a manufacturer in China or Vietnam or someplace else can see what someone in the Midwest of the US or somebody in France is purchasing. They can, and they can understand it. They don't see you personally, but they just see the data, the general data of what's selling. That's the magic of the system. And the goal has been to automate this, but this has been a very difficult thing to do. So I've been addressing this for 15 years. They've been trying to find a way to automate, and they can automate certain parts of it. During the pandemic, for instance, we saw the seaports, the container ports, a lot of automation there because the workers were sick and weren't able to come in. But if you think about seaports, really, you're talking about big cranes on tracks, like railroad tracks, moving big boxes around and putting them on ships. That's something that can be automated. You just build big robots, and gradually all our seaports are becoming robotized.
Yeah, I mean, part of the investments that we've seen, that China's been making with the Belt and Road Initiative has been really focused on that sort of port capability as well.
Yeah, China understands supply chain better than anyone because they are the workshop of the world. They supply the world. Of the 15 largest seaports or container ports in the world, half of them are in China. And you can imagine those are in Hong Kong, near Shenzhen, and also, of course, in Shanghai, all the great seaports from the past. And those seaports, if you haven't been to Hong Kong recently, when you go to the airport now, you drive past the Cheung Kong container port, and it goes on for miles. It's astonishingly large, like the sheer number of goods. Brett, at any given moment, there are 5,000 ships on the seas with containers, and each of those ships has some 22,000, what they call 20-foot equivalent containers, those container boxes that you'll typically see in the back of a truck or on a train. This is the building block of the supply chain, the 20-foot equivalent container, and just the history of that is astounding. Because what did we do before containers? Do you know what we did before there were containers?
They had boxes. They just had boxes, right?
Have you seen
just different size boxes made out of wood generally, and they just stacked them up.
As bad as you can imagine. There were nets, cargo nets, and they would put boxes and bags and bundles and barrels, and all this stuff would go inside the ship, and then it might get wet, it might leak, there might be rats, it might get spoiled, it might bust open. Stuff disappeared. Strangely, often bottles of whiskey disappeared when it came to a port. And so the idea of putting the goods in a container that can go on a truck and then taking that truck to a seaport and having a crane put that box on the ship, and the box is waterproof and airtight, that was a radical concept in the 1950s. And it took until the 1960s to reconfigure the ports to do that. And you can imagine there were tremendous protests at the time because the docks had lots of workers. They had a ton of labor. We used to call them stevedores. These workers at the docks. They were all displaced very, very quickly. So that displacement occurred immediately when a container port shipped, when a port switched over to becoming a container port. All those dock workers got unemployed. So 20,000 people would be unemployed. So if you see, watch the Marlon Brando movie On the Waterfront, because you'll see each of those dock workers came with a hook, and that was their hook that they would use to pull goods out of the ship. It's crazy to think that's how goods were transferred. And because of that, because it was so inefficient and expensive and labor intensive, there just wasn't that much global trade. So the decision to switch to containers is really the beginning of globalization and the weaving together of international economies. And Brett, this has been a good thing because it's not only given people more choice and created global businesses and created jobs all over the world, it's spread prosperity, but also it's good for peace.
Yeah.
And I want to say that, I want to emphasize that, because a lot of times people criticize the United States. We don't invest in our own infrastructure. And that's certainly true. It's a valid criticism. But what we do invest in is safe transportation around the world. And what people fail to remember is before 1950, it was quite dangerous to send a ship around the world. And there wasn't as much as there is today. There was a lot less. There was about 10% as much goods shipped across seas, because boats could get stopped. Other navies could stop your ship. They could seize goods. They could sink it. Sometimes there were wars and so forth. we take it for granted that the United States has 1,000 military bases around the world and several different Navy fleets whose mission is to keep the sea lanes free, mainly
Well,
to
I
make sure
mean, the British did that beforehand, but they did
they
it
did it for the British.
their own economic advantage, right?
Yeah, they
Which
did it
was
for the British,
different.
but they didn't, not so
Yeah,
much
yeah.
if you
They didn't do it
Portuguese
for
or
everyone
Dutch, right?
else.
There's
Yeah.
400 years of history of some pretty intense wars and conflicts. So this is a big thing that the U.S. has spent its money on. Essentially, as a democracy, the United States has decided to invest in peaceful transportation on the seas. 90% of manufactured goods go through the supply chain. 90% of manufactured goods go through maritime trade. So there is a huge amount of benefit for the whole world here. I'm bringing all this up because I've been reading quite a lot lately, authors who are speculating about the near future. For instance, if Trump comes back into power, which is a real strong possibility here in the United States, he's made it pretty clear that he's not that interested in maintaining peace or spending money um, preserving the sea lanes in other parts of the world. Unless there's a direct payback for the U.S., he doesn't see the point. And so he might
But the
undo
payback
that.
is, as you said, global trading stability,
Yeah,
right?
we take
So,
it for granted, right? It's really hard to
but
measure.
I think China might step in and fill that role.
Well, this is exactly what they're seeking to do, right? So they're
Yeah,
building 200 ships a year. The United States has no
and the
capacity to build ships
yeah,
that fast. So you're going to see there's a very strong possibility of a conflict, not just there. Also, look at the Houthis. They're shooting rockets, in the sea lanes. And just this week, a ship had to be abandoned because it got hit by rockets from the Houthis. So around the world, you're seeing supply chain is being tested by nations that are starting to flex their muscles. Another example would be Russia interfering with the shipping from the Ukraine during that conflict, which is also ongoing. And so around the world, the supply chain is being stressed out. Another factor that's stressing the supply chain is climate change.
mm,
We saw that in the Suez Canal, where the water levels were not deep enough for the ships to maintain a course, and they crashed on a sandbar and blocked up that very narrow passage,
yeah,
which shut down some 25% of global
yeah. That's
shipping.
crazy.
It's
Yeah.
crazy that one little mistake or one little problem can cause that kind
So,
of ripple effect.
I mean, it'll be interesting to see as we start to automate these systems. Are we going to have some? Are we going to have some issues? I mean, I do think you're going to start to see. Think about automated ships
Yeah,
out on
it
the,
is.
and being attacked by pirates and shot by Houthi rebels and so forth. Right? How is an autonomous ship going to cope with that? Yeah, maybe better than a captain ship.
I
I don't
mean, look,
know,
first of
but
all, if you're a pilot of one of the ships today, if you're the captain of one of the ships today, you're not going to fight back because your
no, no,
ship
no,
is just a big target. There's no way you're going to fight back. But on the other hand, it's not that easy to board a ship that's moving in the sea. Those
no.
ships are mighty tall, and the little speedboats that the guerrilla warriors use, they're quite small, right? So there's a big gap there, and the ship is moving, right? But
Yeah,
they are
yeah.
targets for rockets, and we've seen that you can disable a ship or even sink a ship that way. Now, here's an interesting thing, Brett. In 2015, I was curious about robotic container ships. And at the time, the people in the supply chain I was dealing with, they were like, "You're crazy. That's never going to happen." And I said, "Well, it could be automated, right? Potentially. There's no technical reason why you can't turn a ship into a giant robot." And they're like, "No, that'll never happen." Well, then a couple of years later, Maersk, the big shipping company, they announced that they were developing
Mm,
autonomous seagoing cargo ships. Well, now all of the six big shipping companies have them in development. And here's what's
absolutely.
interesting. They run at very slow speeds. And that's
And they
because
run as convoys, right? They run as group. They
you can
group them
group them
together, right?
together and have collective intelligence. And they run very slow. They run at a speed that is so slow, it's about a quarter of the speed that a current container ship would move at. The human crews wouldn't stand it. They would go crazy if they had to be stuck on a ship that was moving that slowly. But that's actually better for the environment because it means fewer emissions, because they're not burning
More
fuel at
fuel
such a
efficient. Yep.
intense rate. And so that's good. They have to go slowly because they're robotic, right? You have to have time to control them, to re-steer them, and so forth. But the point is that the systems exist today. This can be done. Of course, the container ports, they're becoming robotized as well. And we already know that
As are the trucks
the
that
trucks,
will
Waymo is
deliver the
developing
containers, right?
robot trucks. And we also have dark factories, right? So dark factory, for the folks who aren't familiar with that, That's a factory that's so robotized that there's no lights inside of it because the robots don't need to see. They're just building everything. It's basically a machine. You put parts in one end and products come out the other side. So yeah, Brett, you can imagine a world not too far in the future where factories are automated, the trucks are automated, the container port is automated, the container ship is automated, the port on the other side is automated, the warehouse is automated, the railroads. In Australia, they're already automating the railroads, you know. If you think about
it. This is happening, right? This is the intent. These systems are intending to update these for robotics. You know, this is why when people talk about this sort of level of automation, I'm surprised that we don't have more of a conversation about techno unemployment. Now, I know the stevedores are gone and things like this, and the truck drivers are gone, but soon we'll have the shelf packers at the factory gone, and things like that, and those people that are left are going to be have to work with this robotic workforce. So you're going to have much more technical orientation. This is one of the interesting things we're seeing now is that when you look at the skill set changes, it doesn't matter whether you're blue collar or you're white collar, you're going to have to be AI competent. So if you're janitorial staff, and you'll be looking after a suite of robots that are cleaning the floors, and you're going to have to keep the robots topped up with cleaning fluids and things like that. That will be your job now. And you can manage this, one person instead of a team of 10 now, whatever, right? But it's just like that's the other side of this we don't talk about. Yes, you need a high level of automation to be competitive as an economy. You need this robot-capable infrastructure. You need to invest in these automated systems and so forth. But this is a transition that human society is making. So when you talk about the state of mind, you have to be, if you're prepared to invest in this type of autonomous infrastructure, and capitalism and globalism will push us towards that, then you have to have a plan for what happens to all these people that you put out of work from these systems that are affected by automation. And I don't think
the workers have to have a plan. People have to have their own plan.
Yes, absolutely.
The responsibility falls on each of us to develop a mentality that embraces
it. But it also is a transition, right? And is a societal transition that we're going to make. And what we spend far too much time debating is whether this is going to happen, instead of dealing with, and I think that really is a good way for us to wrap up this conversation today, is that if you want to have that state of mind that future-proofs you for this, then you have to be prepared for those changes that are going to come and impact society, and you have to be a part of the solution for that.
Yeah, you have to lean into it and get smart about it.
But arguing whether or not this is going to happen, whether or not climate change is going to impact, whether or not robots are going to take human jobs, that's largely, I've come to the conclusion, is largely a waste of time, because it's with the amount of the trillions of dollars that are going to go into this, it's just going to happen because the market
is going to happen. Because candidly, the free market's going to make it happen. Exactly. And then an enlightened government is going to say, well, we can get an advantage here. Like, for instance, maybe in the UAE or maybe in Saudi Arabia, they can foster it. They can do infrastructure investment to accelerate it. But what's silly is to try to resist it. All right. Well, listen, this has been a fun time catching up with you, Brett. Always a pleasure. And I am riveted by this subject. I think it's the most interesting in the world.
We should get some supply chain automation guys on and have a talk about this.
I know exactly the people to talk to. Sure, we can certainly do that. That would be a fun conversation, because it's a lot of incremental progress, but it adds up to quite a lot because there are so many companies in the supply chain.
And if you're listening to this episode today, give us your feedback. Get on social with us and talk to us about what you think is going to happen, and where you see, what you see your own role in this future is going to be, and how you have a futurist mindset.
All right, folks, you've been listening to The Futurists, me, Rob Tercek, and my buddy, Brett King, always thinking about the future. We encourage you to adopt this mindset. And to help you do that, next week, we'll be back with another Futurists. Until then, I want to thank the folks at Provoke, particularly Kevin and Elizabeth, who helped make the show possible. And next week, we'll be back with somebody else who is thinking about and shaping and influencing the future, building the future that we may not even envision yet, but hopefully we'll learn about it and embrace it. We encourage you to do the same. And until then, we shall see you in the future. Well, that's it for The Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did, please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.